Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the first symposium for our celebrating our 25th anniversary of the Medical Scholars Program. And we hope we have an exciting program today. And I welcome all of you to participate. The format will be, we will have 4 speakers, and after each person's talk, if we have time, there'll be time for a few questions and answers, and we will have a panel discussion at the end of after the last speaker. Today's symposium is directed at the question and a discussion of medicine and the social contract. We're going to have 4 symposia and a homecoming weekend. The first symposium, The Scope of Medicine and the Social Contract, is today. On November 18th, we will have a symposia directed at meeting the challenges of excellence and diversity. Then in January, on January 20th, we will have a symposium called Building Excellence in the Continuum of Medical Education. And we will conclude our symposia with a symposium on the BA-MD experience, in which we will invite leaders of BA-MD programs across the country to talk about their specific missions and missions and goals that unite all of us. And finally, and very excitingly, we will conclude this celebratory year with a homecoming weekend. We will have presentations of our current students' senior theses. We will have alumni talks and panels, and we will have a celebratory gala bringing everyone together. So we hope that these symposia, as well as other events, will serve to unite and reinforce the learning community that we have built. And we really are collectively excited about this. And we really look forward to meeting everybody as best we can in person and virtually. There is a sadness that I have to record. When the founding director of the GPPA Medical Scholars Program was Dr. Leslie Sandlow. Les was the Executive Associate Dean Emeritus of Education, and he was the first director of the program and taught in the program and taught in the Evolution of Medicine course until the day he died, which was July 21st of this year. Les and I were scheduled to meet on the afternoon of that day to discuss how he could participate and how he could continue to share his enthusiasm about the program and about the evolution of the program. So I'd like to take a moment in memory of Les. Thank you. So today, in talking about the scope of medicine and the social contract, I will talk about the origins of modern medical education on the shoulders of giants. Dr. Rosenblatt will talk about artificial intelligence and health equity and Quo Vadis. Dr. Ludmer will talk about reflections on medicine's social contract, and Dr. Cohn will talk about, has medicine lost its mojo? So I will start now by talking about the origins of modern medical education on the shoulders of giants. And the picture that I'm showing on the screen, as I said to our board of trustees several years ago when I showed this picture, this is not my ancestral residence. This is the Johns Hopkins Medical School shortly after it opened in 1889. And the Johns Hopkins Medical School and the nature of the medical education that it started has served as the role model for excellence and for the medical curriculum for the last century or so. Interestingly enough, Johns Hopkins began through the philanthropy of Johns Hopkins, a Baltimore philanthropist who donated at that time the largest amount of money for any American medical education university, namely about $7.3 million. And the stipulation was to build a university namely Johns Hopkins, after the German model of higher education, and also to start medical education along that model as well, stipulating that the incoming medical class should have had a university training, and in most cases, a university degree. Also of interest is that the university was running out of money. The amount of money that Mr. Hopkins gave wasn't sufficient. And the women wives of the philanthropers, of the Baltimore philanthropists said, well, we will get you more money provided you agree to admit women to your medical school class. And that happened. And interestingly enough, one of the first women in the M1 class of Johns Hopkins was a very famous woman, Gertrude Stein, who stayed for 3 years and then went to Paris to begin her career in terms of literature and art. At any rate, it's important to note that Hopkins has been the template for medical education for the 20th century. And these are the 4 doctors, a very famous portrait by John Singer Sargent, and you can see right in front is William Osler. To his behind him is Halstead, William Halstead, the head of surgery, Howard Kelly, and Joseph Welsh, not Joseph Welsh, I'm sorry, William Welsh, the dean of the medical school. These 4 people basically, over their short period of time, or comparatively short period of time, held all the leading offices in organized medicine. Presidents of the American Medical Association, president of the Association of American Medical Colleges, and president of all sorts of professional medical education groups, which allowed them to have an incredible amount of influence. So what I'm going to talk about today is the origins of modern medical education, the 4 paradigms of medicine, the evolution of the medical curriculum, educating physicians for today and tomorrow, and I will conclude with a discussion of our own program and BA/MD education at the University of Illinois. So there are really 3 principles that have defined medical education that were enunciated by 3 of the giants of medicine. William Osler, who is really probably the most revered physician of the 20th century. There are societies called Osler societies all over the world named after him. And I'll discuss him in a minute. But he made a statement called medicine is an art based on science, which brings together both the humanistic and scientific aspects of medicine. Abraham Flexner in 1910 was commissioned by the Carnegie Foundation to evaluate and assess medical education in the United States and Canada. And he wrote a report which was dramatic and changed medical education, which I will talk about. But the comment that he made was that effective medical education must be done within the university. And that's a major statement, because it provided the home for medical education in this country, in Canada, and subsequently in the UK and in Europe as well. And finally, Francis Weld Peabody, who was a Harvard physician at the Brigham Hospital, wrote a paper that appeared in the Journal of the American Medical Association, and the theme of that paper was caring for the patient is caring about the patient. And I would argue that these three statements are the three principles that really continue to define modern medical education. So in terms of, let us start by talking about the first giant, and that giant is Sir William Osler. I show you a picture of Osler on the right, and there are two definitive biographies about Osler. The first one was written a number of years after his death by a very famous American neurosurgeon, Harvey Cushing, who also was a student of Osler's. And that biography was very renowned and won the Pulitzer Prize. And subsequently, about 10 years ago, Michael Bliss revisited Osler and wrote what now is really the current definitive work on Osler, William Osler: A Life in Medicine. And the Bliss book is on our medical scholars reading list. And I have had the good fortune of meeting and interacting with Michael Bliss, who unfortunately died a couple of years ago. But in talking with Michael, he said when he started to write the biography about Osler, he in the back of his mind, he wanted to show that Osler was not the saint he was portrayed to be. And Bliss said, after 5 years, I gave up. Osler was a saint. So that was to me, an interesting comment by a biographer who spent a long time looking into Osler's life and influence. So why was Osler the most influential physician of the 20th century? He was a pathologist, a physician, an educator, a bibliophile, a historian, and towards the end of his life, in 1905, he left Johns Hopkins to become the Regius Professor of Medicine at Oxford. And during that time, he not only played a great amount of time and influence in becoming in dealing with founding the Royal Society of Medicine, but he also was a governor of the Bodleian Library, the Central Library of Oxford, one of the great libraries in the world. And he was elected president of the British Classicist Society and wrote a short book called the Old Humanities and the New Medicine, arguing that medicine and humanities were part of the same two-sided coin. He early on in his life recognized that pathology represented the scientific basis of clinical medicine and spent a good deal of time doing autopsies and categorizing disease, that culminated in his book, The Principles and Practice of Clinical Medicine, which was the first scientific medical text in the English language, and had a dramatic influence on medicine and the teaching of medicine. Just in the British colonialization of the world, when the British Army went to varying countries, the physicians all carried Osler's medical book. So that through that, the Principles and Practice of Clinical Medicine became an international text. Osler also was responsible for the concept of ward rounds, of bedside teaching, of clinical pathological conferences, and really devising the clinical teaching and the nature of clinical medical education in North America. And he was a prolific writer, and one of his most famous essays was an essay called Equanimitas, in which he spoke to the nature of the physician-patient relationship. This is an essay that all of our students read. So he was really a giant in the evolution of modern medicine. And here, this slide shows him in the 1891, 1892, writing the Principles and Practice of Medicine, which he did in an office off one of the wards of the Johns Hopkins Hospital. The second giant is Abraham Flexner, because Flexner was commissioned by the Carnegie Foundation to assess American medical schools. And he personally visited, I think, 155 medical schools and evaluated each of them. And as a result, he established, his report established the university as a basis for medical education. He also, in part of making that assessment, argued that the medical curriculum needed to be based on the foundations of medicine, or the foundations of medical science, and then needed to evolve in how you use an understanding of basic science to deal with clinical problems, so that essentially set the nature of the American medical curriculum and then the British medical curriculum to basic sciences followed by clinical sciences. This is now changing somewhat, but the overall argument that medicine is an art based on science, as Osler stated it, is still true and still appreciated. The Flexner Report also argued for a full-time medical faculty that really begot the academic medical center of today. By 1920, as a function of the Flexner Report, 50 medical schools were closed because they didn't meet a set of standard criteria, leaving 81 medical schools operative in North America. There is some contention about the issue of closing medical schools, but I won't get into that today. It's beyond the scope of what I want to talk about. Finally, there is this physician, Francis Weld Peabody, who comes from a very socially known Boston or Massachusetts family, the Peabodys, and he was a Harvard physician, and he, in my mind, really popularized the nature of medicine, in that medicine requires the interaction of humanism and science. And he made this statement: for the secret of the care of the patient is in caring for the patient. That was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1927. And the Journal of the American Medical Association deems this so important that they republish this paper every 10 years. And I think Dr. Cohn will talk about humanism in medicine at the end of this symposium. And I think that humanism in that Dr. Peabody was a champion for humanism in medicine. So now, if we look at medicine, there are really 4 paradigms. 2 of them are really humanistic paradigms. A third is a bridge, and the 4th is the scientific basis of medicine. So the first paradigm is to alleviate suffering, and the second paradigm is to do no harm. And the third paradigm is that medicine is an uncertain science, and the root of that paradigm is biological individuality and the uncertainty of understanding how the individuality relates to therapy, treatment, and disease. We're doing much better in this because of our ability to deal with the human genome and to decipher it. And the future is because of this is going to be much different in terms than the past, and we will encounter lots of new ethical questions that would not have been questions 20 or 30 years ago. But that's what happens with the evolution and progress of society and of man. And finally, we now can appreciate that health and disease represent differing equilibrium states that relate to the concept of homeostasis, first elaborated by a physiologist called Walter Cannon. And this paradigm owes its existence to the argument that cells, tissues, organs, and organisms obey the laws of chemical equilibrium, that pathology represents a perturbation of that equilibrium, that bioregulation consists of signaling coupled to information flow. That's what DNA, RNA, protein, the central dogma of molecular biology equation, is all about. And that's what's fueling the current revolution in the biomedical sciences that is leading to unparalleled change in generating concepts of precision medicine, individualized medicine, and so forth. So these 4 paradigms of medicine really put together the art and science and humanism of medicine in meaningful ways. And here I show the importance of homeostasis, signaling, and information flow. Homeostasis, as you see in the left, represents chemical equilibrium states those states are maintained by signaling that involves things like hormones and growth factors and cytokines, and they relate to information flow, activating or repressing certain genes, leading to transcription and translation that is sequence dependent, and the whole science of genetics and genomics is within that realm. And then we have epigenetics, which is the ability of the gene to relate to external factors. And this is really still a beginning science. Lots more will be determined about the nature of environment and information, and artificial intelligence is likely to relate to this as well. So when you put all of this together, as we have in terms of medical education, what are the characteristics that we want in our physicians? And basically, the organized medicine, the medical boards, the people responsible for devising and maintaining medical curriculum, and the profession have focused on the fact that there are at least four central characteristics of a physician: duty and responsibility, skill, knowledge, and altruism. And all of those focus ultimately on judgment. What we really are trying to do in medical education, and perhaps in all education, is to help our students find the resources, the intellectual resources, to make reasoned and good judgments. So that too then is the ultimate aim of the education that we are engaged in and have been engaged in over the 25 years of the BA-MD program at the University of Illinois. So over the years, after the Flexner report, which established the template for medical education being within the realm of the university and having a fundamental scientific core that then leads to grafting clinical judgment and clinical activity on that, the next really big assessment of medical education was a report called the General Professional Education of the Physician and College Preparation for Medicine, the GPEP report, which was done by the Association of American Medical Colleges in 1984. And what that report basically said was that pre-professional education was necessary for a number of reasons, not to be a space filler between high school and medical school, but to develop analytic and diagnostic skills, instill humanistic values, and promote respect and concern for patients. And to also encourage a broad-based undergraduate education and the value of liberal arts, to emphasize critical thinking and problem solving in small groups rather than exclusively using the traditional lecture form, to deal with clinical clerkships that reinforce humanism and the patient-physician relationship as a goal, and that the education as a profession, as a professional goal of medical faculty should be appreciated and rewarded. And that was a major assessment of medical education and led to some change. More recently, the Flexner report was revisited in a report jointly sponsored by the Association of American Medical Colleges and the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, called Scientific Foundations for Future Physicians. And what that report did was it endorsed the conclusions of the GPEP report. And it made the comment that medical education is a continuum for life, that it starts with the university pre-medical education, moves forward with undergraduate medical education, which gives way to postgraduate medical education, residencies, fellowships, and so forth. And finally, continuing medical education. And what that means is lifelong learning. And all stages of medical education need to relate to the integration of information with the aim of producing a competent physician. And that report has had a number of very recent ramifications. It suggested changes in medical education. It enhanced the concepts of pre-medical education in terms of more sociology, more psychology, more understanding of behavioral sciences, and more understanding of health politics. It led to the revision of the MCAT exam, the medical college admissions or aptitude test, and it in one form is suggested to be changing of the licensing exams. That has yet to totally happen. And the question of, is 4 years of medical school optimal, or can one complete a medical curriculum, at least in terms of primary care, in 3 years? So that really summarizes what I want to say about the evolution of the classical medical curriculum. It's still an active field, and things are changing. For example, there are a number of medical schools that are testing the concept of the 3-year curriculum and incorporating essentially the 4th year, what we know as the 4th year of medical education, into the 1st year of postgraduate medical education, something that, by the way, has been done in English and European medical schools for a long, long time. We had the challenge of, at the University of Illinois, of developing this integrated pre-medical medical curriculum, which we call the GPPA Medical Scholars Program. And I will talk about that for the rest of my time. So when the program was started 25 years ago, Dr. Sandlow and I met and talked about what is the mission. And we evolved a mission statement. The GPPA Medical Scholars Program facilitates an excellent liberal arts and engineering undergraduate education enriched by special College of Medicine programs focused on the profession and scope of medicine and healthcare in the context of the evolution of social justice and the social contract and its fundamental relation to the profession of medicine, to a talented group of students with a demonstrated interest in medicine. So you can see from this mission statement that the social contract and social justice is built into the fabric of our pre-medical education. So far as I know, there is no other BA MD program in North America that has this explicitly stated and has a core curriculum, which I'm about to describe. So we have a philosophy of education, and our philosophy of education was encapsulated by a talk given by Jim Watson of Watson and Crick at a meeting that I organized in 1993 to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the double helix. And what Watson said at that meeting in his talk, talking about what he felt was the nature of and philosophy for education, he said that ideas and concepts are more important than facts. Memorization is not a substitute for understanding, and wherever possible, read the original literature, not textbooks. In our program, which really embraces the concept of challenge and striving for excellence, that good is not enough, in our program, those fundamentals are stressed. So what are our expectations in the strive for excellence that good is not enough? We basically have 5 expectations, and that is becoming a critical thinker. That's a common argument. But what isn't so common is you need really to determine what's important to think about. Clearly, you have to acquire the basic knowledge and understanding of sciences, disciplines, and concepts central to the pursuit of a medical education and a professional life in medicine, and also pursue and prioritize other activities that help you lead an enjoyable life. And these include literature, music, art, athletics, theater, etc. And finally, we recognized at the beginning that our goal for this program was to train leaders in medicine. And therefore, we wanted to introduce students as early as possible to becoming socially responsible, active, and participatory leaders in society, understand the political process, participate in the political process. Are we successful? Before I get into the curriculum, question is, are we successful? So our goal at the beginning was to attract and find excellent students. This was in the context that the university was trying to change itself into a university that could find excellent students. And we wanted to see in this great experiment whether we could attract students who would become leaders in medicine. After 25 years, what we're celebrating is we have graduated 1,000 students. 1,000 students have medical degrees. Of those 1,000, of those who are ready to think about an independent professional career, that's roughly at this point about 300. About a third of them have gone into academic medicine as defined by having faculty positions in medical schools across the country. So how does that compare to the world of academic medicine? Well, the 2 schools that advertise that they are leaders in producing academic physicians are Johns Hopkins and Harvard. And the numbers they talk about are about a third. So we're in very, very good company. What is it? What's the mode that we chose to get to this point? Well, we took our mission statement, and in order to facilitate an undergraduate pre-medical education in the context of the evolution of the social contract and its relation to medicine, we developed a core curriculum specifically for this program. And there are 4 core courses: the scope of medicine, the evolution of medicine, health policy and society, and the art and science of medicine. So these are required courses. They are discussion courses in which students read original literature, and we have small sections of no more than 17 or 18 people in a section, and we discuss the general broad topics in terms of these 4 courses. So the scope of medicine course, which starts during the first 8 weeks of their second semester, covers what is the scope of the profession of medicine? What are the natures and goals of a liberal arts education? What is an educated person? What does the education of physicians look like? How do you organize a medical curriculum? How does that organization relate to the practice of medicine? What is a profession about? What are the roles and responsibilities of the physician in the social contract context? And finally, what are the responsibilities, rewards, and challenges of a life in medicine? That course then gives way to the next course, the evolution of medicine. And in that course, we talk about the historic developments that contributed to the present state of the profession, of medical institutions, of medical knowledge, of medical advances and themes, and the changing role of the physician and the medical profession within society. That then gives way to a third course, and that talks about health policy and medicine and society. One of the arguments behind this course is that the physician is ultimately the patient advocate, and therefore the physician has an obligate responsibility to understand public policy and the politics of medicine and healthcare, the social context in which the practice of medicine takes place, how public policy relates to health issues, the interrelationships between local, national, and politics, and the areas that have had widespread implications for medical care in the U.S. and abroad. And that gives way to our last course, which is taken from the statement of Osler that medicine is an art based on science. The concept that the NIH has of from discovery to health, what is the interplay of the scientific foundations of medicine? What is the nature of the physician-patient interaction? What are the developments that have related to new concepts, particularly now, things like gene editing and the challenges of evidence-based medicine and artificial intelligence, emerging technologies into clinical utility, and the examination and discussion of medically related readings intrinsic to the practice of medicine. So we also, in addition to this, it's very important to us that we build a learning community, and to orchestrate and exercise that community, we have town halls, lectures, symposium, social events, movie, theater, book clubs, sometimes competitive athletics, and we produce a newsletter, reading list, and an annual yearbook. So in order to build this learning community, we have organized over the last 2 years a medical scholars advisory council that serves as a form of student government. It plans and organizes student-focused activities. I've got to thank MSAC right now, because they played and are playing a great role in these symposia and attending them. They advise us in terms of the needs of the students. They've been particularly useful during the pandemic, the time of the pandemic, in helping us understand the needs of the students and isolation. They provide a continuing dialogue, and they are responsible for organizing and sustaining the Continuum, which is our newsletter. So finally, recently we as part of our establishing our learning community, we've organized a parallel to the white coat ceremony in the first year of medical school that celebrates the beginning of the students' or formal training in medicine. We have organized an event in which all of the students get a fleece, which I'm wearing, which celebrates their entering the medical scholars program. And we have an oath for all of the alumni and students who are out there. I am going to read the oath, and you feel free to subscribe to it. The oath states, as GPPA medical scholars, we are united and dedicated to the principle that for us, good is not enough. We strive for excellence. We believe in social justice and democracy, and have zero tolerance for any discrimination and injustice. We are committed to be knowledgeable, skillful, altruistic, and I've just lost it. Responsible, and what's the
Participatory members.
and participatory members. I lost the slide for some reason. But at any rate, that is our oath. That is our raison d'etre. And we feel that that we are succeeding in our program. And I will stop here. I think we're too far advanced to have questions. So I will introduce our next speaker, Dr. Mark Rosenblatt, who is our Executive Dean of the College of Medicine, a distinguished ophthalmologist and scholar and human being. Everyone's biography is out there for you to see, so I'm not going to do exhaustive introductions. Dr. Rosenblatt, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Chambers. I would like to thank you, Don, and the program for inviting me to be part of this symposium. It's a very august group of presenters this evening, and certainly when we look at the entire scope of the symposium that will happen in celebration of the 25th anniversary of the program, it's really such a tremendously a diverse group of folks with experiences and interests that really span the full realm of medicine and medical education. This evening, I'm going to just not delve so much into history. I'm in the midst of those who are experts in medical history and in the education history. We'll talk a little bit more of something that's a little bit more forward, perhaps the future, thinking about what artificial intelligence represents, how that may interact with health equity, and to think about where we might be going. Here. Before I do that, I thought I might make a few comments about the GPA Medical Scholars Program at 25 years. If you do read my biography, I don't suggest you spend too much time doing that, but you might note that I actually am a graduate of a guaranteed admissions program. It was the honors program in medical education at the University of Miami. And it doesn't exist any longer, at least not in its current form. And I think if you were to examine that program and compare it to the GPPA program, you would find very few things that are in common. I suppose that it is a guaranteed admissions program. I'd like to think that those of us who entered the program in Miami were dedicated, even at young ages, to the idea of, and really the practice of medicine. That we accomplished some things when we were in high school. But really, the program that Dr. Chambers has built, and with the help of so many others, of course, is really something quite special. And I think the contrast, the program in which I was in, really speak to that. My program was a 6-year program. It's only 2 years in undergraduate. We certainly were not striving to do anything around humanities or really well-rounded education. It was pretty darn focused in that regard. Also, it was a program without curriculum that was really tailored to the program. I mean, sure, I engaged in a curriculum at the University of Miami, but the kinds of things that Don has created to really enrich the development, the academic development, the personal development of students in the GPPA program is really just so impressive. And I think the output of that effort really is the tremendous impact that GPPA medical scholars have had. Of course, on their communities where they may practice, but perhaps even more impressively in academic medicine and the things that they've done beyond that. So when I look at the things that he's done, I'm actually quite jealous of the students who have been able to go through the program, and those, of course, who are still in the program, the kinds of opportunities that you have to really develop. So I think, and speaking now as the dean of the college, we're certainly very proud of the dedication to excellence that the GPPA program has. And Don obviously spoke quite a bit more about that, but I thought I would just mention that on the outset. I think the topic I'll deal with in my talk should be interesting to people who are scholars and are interested in medicine. At least I hope they are. There are a number of forces which have shaped, modern medicine. I think Dr. Chambers talked about some of these, whether it was at some point in the history of medicine an intense focus on anatomy and trying to draw anatomy, followed by an understanding of physiology, pathophysiology, important. The idea that germs cause disease, that's a pretty important one. The idea that we could also create therapeutics, small molecules in most cases, sometimes derived from natural agents to treat disease, to fight infection, very important. And as I think, again, as alluded to, the idea that we are destiny is in some way controlled by genes, at least our health destiny, that can actually be modified by environment. Epigenetics, of course, is important. And of course, more recently, the idea that not only do we have genes, but there are new techniques, whether it's CRISPR or other forms of gene editing, that could fundamentally change our internal biological material, genes. I won't talk about those things today directly, except to say I do think that gene editing and CRISPR technology, for instance, are going to be one of the really shaping forces in medicine. Instead, I'm going to talk about something else, which is perhaps a little bit newer. I think the advances in our understanding of genes, the modification of genes, has been a bit incremental, an evolution. Whereas the idea that data science, that the data all around us is going to be able to be used to shape our health is probably a bit of a newer concept. Artificial intelligence, the algorithms, the approaches are in its relative infancy, even compared to medicine, which compared to some other sciences, perhaps it's also in its infancy. And so we're surrounded by data. We're surrounded by intelligent or not so intelligent machines that gather tremendous amounts of data about us. We live in an internet of things where our refrigerators know when we open and close them. They might know what we're taking out of the refrigerators. We have cars that are very intelligent. They know how fast we're driving, which parts, where we're driving. We live in a world where much of our financial information could be known. And how you take all these disparate types of data that don't even seem to be related to health and combine them with things that we traditionally think of as health-related data, monitoring of our blood pressure, measuring of our eyesight, knowing what our cholesterol numbers might be. These all are different kinds of data that in concert can be used to tell us quite a bit about our health future and to inform how we might actually impact that in the way of therapeutics. So artificial intelligence, I think, is a powerful force. Something else that I think has evolved over time is our concept around health equity. Medicine for decades, perhaps centuries, has understood its role in taking care of those who aren't just fortunate, but those who might be unfortunate. There have been charity hospitals and ways that physicians have dedicated themselves to taking care of those who are socioeconomically or otherwise underserved. And that's not such a new concept. But the idea that health should be delivered equally, that all folks, irrespective of where they may have come from or their socioeconomic status, their ethnicity, their race, should have access to equal levels of healthcare. And that those fair and appropriate access to healthcare should lead to outcomes that are also equal. That is a newer concept. And I think something, an evolution really in our understanding of the responsibilities, an evolution in understanding what is that social contract really that we have around medicine. And that I think is also a very important factor that's shaping our world. And this is a reality. So what about life expectancy in Chicago? If you happen to live in Streeterville, one of the more affluent parts of our city, your life expectancy is roughly 90 years. That's a very healthy life expectancy. However, if you live in a different part of Chicago, Inglewood neighborhood, your life expectancy is roughly 60 years. It's a 3 decades of difference in 2 parts of the same city located just 10 miles apart. This is the kind of disparity you might expect to see between first world countries and third world countries, between maybe rural and urban settings. This is the same city, but very, very different outcomes. So the idea that there is inequity in the health of people in our country and in the world, it's a reality. And I think it is an obligation, part of a social contract of physicians and those engaged in biomedical research to try to address this as possible. And these disparities haven't eroded over time, but either stayed roughly the same or increased over time. This despite the vast number of developments in medicine and therapeutics. So something to consider as we bring artificial intelligence, machine learning into the practice of medicine. So what are the challenges around health equity and artificial intelligence? Well, one issue is if you're going to use data science, what data are you going to use? And in many cases, data sets may not include data from a diverse population. If you are only taking data from those who are white, or those who are male, or those who are socioeconomically well off, you're not taking data from a population that really mirrors that of our country and our world. And the concern is a lack of data diversity could lead to artificial intelligence with, I'm an ophthalmologist, so I'll call them scotomas, blind spots. And that these data algorithms, the tools that we gain from AI, may only serve a particular, very specific population. So again, going back to ophthalmology, something near and dear to me, these are fundus photos, pictures of the back of eyes. On the left, if you look in a textbook, this will be called a normal fundus. I agree, that looks very normal. What do you think the label, the image on the right is labeled in a textbook? It is a fundus from an African-American person, right? So it doesn't say it's normal, it really ascribes it to a particular ethnicity. So they're both normal fungi, completely normal. And so this leads to the fact that even within the medical literature, we often have scotomas around diseases that happen in diverse populations. If you look in an ophthalmology textbook, you see very few fundus images from those with black or brown skin. This is also true in dermatology textbooks. I recently brought this fact to the attention of the very senior members of the American Board of Ophthalmology. And I think hopefully we'll see some changes in how we educate our students and physicians, and even how we test them around this very, very important area. So if we're not even teaching around this, when we gather data to input in these algorithms, we also have these scotomas. We're not really taking in the full array of disease states and the full array of patients. So here's an example, I think, of where something was done well. So not too long ago in JAMA, an algorithm, a deep learning algorithm, was developed to help diagnose diabetic retinopathy just using fundus photos. This is something that normally requires an ophthalmologist, a human being, to look at carefully and try to decide whether a patient with diabetes has a potentially blinding form of retinopathy. And they created an algorithm that could look at these images and diagnose diabetic retinopathy as well as the best specialists in diabetic retinopathy, vitreoretinal surgeons. And at least anecdotally, I've heard that initially they used a training set of images that only involved Caucasian individuals. And it did a great job of identifying retinopathy in those with white skin. But when they tried to take this to other countries, it didn't work very well. And so they then enlisted additional sites for study, including in India and elsewhere. And they eventually came up with an algorithm, this is what the algorithm they published, that performed just as well in the United States on white Americans as it did on folks in India with different colors of skin. And so this is a very important point. And so at the University of Illinois, at the Illinois Eye Infirmary, we have a very diverse population set, and we're trying to create real-world multimodal longitudinal data for ophthalmology. And again, other work is being done at UIC in similar fashions to try to make sure that we're taking diverse data sets to create algorithms that will work hopefully for everyone. The second aspect to consider when we use AI is what diseases are we going to study? Artificial intelligence technology is really applicable to almost any disease, but bias in the selection of clinical problems may lead to the neglect of key diseases, particularly those diseases that affect diverse populations. So this is, again, a very informal, maybe pseudoscientific approach. But if you go into PubMed and you search the term artificial intelligence plus, and you add another search term, artificial intelligence plus cancer, well, really quite a large number of hits, although still relatively small compared to, I think, what we'll see in the coming years. You get over 17,000 hits. If you look at a disease like macular degeneration, of course, I go to ophthalmology again. This is a disease that is primarily affects white individuals in advanced stages of age. You get about 215 hits, so not so well studied. But if you go to artificial intelligence plus sickle cell disease, sickle cell, they're less than 30 hits. And you would imagine that sickle cell disease would be a very important disease that would be amenable to study through AI. To be able to predict perhaps which patients are going to have a sickling crisis, which patients are going to require hospitalization, how best to decrease the severity of crises. These are all things that I think AI would be beneficial, but right now this disease is being neglected and really ignored by those doing AI work in medicine. Again, as an example, Dr. Paul Chan, our head of ophthalmology, is developing platforms to use artificial intelligence and telehealth to diagnose a disease called retinopathy of prematurity, a disease which does exist in the United States, but which is very prevalent in developing countries who are just learning how to use oxygen to treat premature babies. And we know that there are epidemics, predictable epidemics of this blinding condition in babies in these underdeveloped countries. And he's using AI on this relatively rare in the US, but very prevalent disease in other countries. And again, applying AI in diverse disease states. Another thing to think about is how do we democratize artificial intelligence? Currently, AI lands in the realm of the data scientists, and the algorithms are very difficult to understand, at least for someone like myself who isn't a data scientist and isn't an engineer. And in order to make any impact on diseases using AI, I need to collaborate with someone in the data science field, someone who really understands these complex algorithms. But the AI industry itself is characterized by lack of diversity, like many other STEM fields. And it's not easily independently applied by clinicians or biological scientists. So we're making attempts, again, at UIC, and there are other places who are doing this, to create end-to-end artificial intelligence platforms. That is, how do we make user-friendly, easily applied pieces of software with good user interfaces to take the data that many of us have access to and meld this with AI applications that we currently find very difficult to access. And so creating these kind of pipelines, I think, will really make a difference. Similar things have happened, for instance, in the analysis of genomics data. There was a time that there were only very few people in the world that could take transcriptome data from biological specimens and make sense of this. And now there are commercially available platforms that allow many labs to take terabytes of data and convert it into scientific hypotheses that can be tested without needing to only go to one of these very few people in the world who understood the underlying algorithms. Another important area to think about is access. So while artificial intelligence has the potential to remove disparities, it also could accentuate health access issues. Because in many cases, there's underlying technology which is required to avail oneself of artificial intelligence. And what do I mean? Well, only 55 to 60% of patients over 65 have access to a smartphone or broadband. And so these are often the kinds of tools that we use to bring AI to individuals. Low-income Americans only have about 53% digital literacy. So understanding how to use the technologies that may be very beneficial to their health. Moreover, artificial intelligence is often embedded or reliant upon other technology. So for instance, on the right, you see a mammography. And in this study, which occurred in Lancet Digital Health, it was a collaboration between radiologists and AI algorithms to diagnose early breast cancer in mammograms. It turns out that alone, radiologists were partially successful in diagnosing cancer. Alone, the AI algorithm was partially successful, but when you mated the expertise of the radiologist plus this AI algorithm, there was a doubling of the ability to diagnose early breast cancer. Which shouldn't go unmentioned is that you have to have access to mammography in order for this AI to have any effect. If you can't get a mammogram, this wonderful AI algorithms won't be able to change the course of disease. And unfortunately, the access to high technology by those in underserved areas, almost by definition, is very difficult. And moreover, it's often high technology that's used to do AI. I'll go back to my example about India and the use of AI to diagnose retinopathy related to diabetes. The study in India was done in one of the best hospitals in Delhi. Very good equipment to take very clear pictures, very wide fields, great. When they began to migrate these algorithms to more rural parts of India, where the photography wasn't quite so good, the images weren't quite so clear, again, the technology started to fail. So if you don't happen to live in a big city, maybe you don't have access to technology needed to avail yourselves of AI. So having this in mind as we develop the algorithms, as we think about the underlying technology is very, very important. The next issue to consider is that there are many social determinants of health. In addition to the things that are obvious, there are many determinants of overall health that reside outside of the healthcare system. The reason that the life expectancy in Englewood compared to Streeterville is so much lower isn't merely because there are fewer doctors in Englewood or fewer hospitals in Englewood. There's also conditions that exist in parts of our country, parts of our world that are not conducive to good health. These include things like economic stability, a strong social and community context, neighborhoods and environment, including violence. Healthcare, of course, is important, but also education. All of these combine to ultimately determine health. And although it's beyond the scope, I think, necessarily of physicians and those in the biomedical sciences, artificial intelligence can and will be applied to these many areas which impact health. And I think that's also something to look forward to hopefully use AI to create health equity. So to take a broader view, artificial intelligence, I believe, and this is an opinion, and I look forward to hearing the opinion of those who are on this Zoom, may really possess the greatest potential of any technology to create health equity. But there are pitfalls that we really need to consider as we bring this technology to the fore. And I'll just talk about some principles for consideration. One is that data should come from a broad range of sources and should reflect the diversity of populations that are afflicted with a particular disease. Secondly, care should be taken to apply AI to diseases which reflect diverse populations of patients, really to those diseases to which AI could have the most impact. Third, attention to providing access to AI by democratizing the technology to widen its use, and also by making AI independent technology more readily available. And finally, we should think about how AI can improve critical social determinants of health. I think these will be a recipe, perhaps, and you may think of 5 or 6 others that I haven't thought about in terms of principles, a recipe for allowing AI to really create a more equitable society, and particularly in the area of health. So as I conclude, what about the GPPA medical scholars 25 years and beyond? What do the next 25 years look like? Well, certainly the impact of graduates of the GPPA Medical Scholars Program will continue to reverberate, right? Many of your very successful graduates are really at the sweet spot in their careers. They're really at the inflection point where they're going to continue to make the most important advances in science and medicine, and that's something to be very proud of. I think the dedication to excellence of the program, again, is something that is and should be enduring. It is really something for all of us to aspire to. And it's wonderful to see your very talented students aspire to that. I know there's no shortage of applications to the program. And beyond, I hope that we start to consider how new technologies, things like AI, will start to meld themselves, continue to weave themselves into your curricula and also into the education of physicians more broadly at the levels of medical students, residents, fellows, but even those who finish training. Because I think particularly AI is going to change the way we think about a doctor's role in society. Physicians are going to have very, very intelligent partners in taking care of patients, machines, who have access to more data than any human being could ever fully wrap literally their arms around. They've read machines can essentially read every paper, can know about almost infinite amounts of data, it seems, things that humans couldn't do. So that'll be a tool. But while some fear, I think that AI could maybe make the physician less relevant, I think it may make physicians more relevant, in that there needs to be a human conduit, a person who's able to talk to patients, understand the particulars of their social situation, whether it's about their religious beliefs or about their socioeconomic status, their relationships with their family. These are things that I think machines are going to find very difficult to deal with. And then to take the very intelligent answers the machine give and map them on to real patients at the bedside, in the clinics. So it may in some ways be empowering to physicians to have this remarkable tool. I don't think we've really thought yet in a serious way about how we're going to use AI or use medical education to spread AI, how we're going to teach our young physicians or even our more senior physicians how to interact with these very intelligent partners. And I think those, maybe some of those on the Zoom call have thought about this or have some ideas about how that might happen. So I'll conclude with one of my favorite quotes from Helen Keller, that optimism is the faith that leads to achievement. Nothing can be done without hope and confidence. And despite all the challenges that our country faces, issues that span far beyond health, but certainly the idea that health equity is a problem, I really am quite optimistic that technology will be part of that, but also the tremendous trainees that come out of programs like the GPEP Medical Scholars Program. So I'll conclude there. Again, I don't know if we have time to answer questions now, but again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you here this evening.
Thank you, Mark. That was wonderful. You raise a number of interesting issues that I don't think we can discuss right now, but I hope that we will be able to discuss at the conclusion of our four speakers. But I really appreciate your thoughts, and in my own mind, they've raised a number of interesting things to think about, both for the program and for consideration of the advance, what I'll call the advance and continuing evolution of medicine. So thank you again. Let us move on to our next speaker. I feel very fortunate to have Kenneth Ludmer accept my invitation, but even more fortunate to have Ken Ludmer as a friend and colleague and discussant. We've had a number of wonderfully exciting conversations related to his own intellectuality and a current project he's involved in. Dr. Ludmer did his undergraduate work at Harvard, has a medical degree from Johns Hopkins, did graduate history work also at Harvard, is the Mabel Dorn Distinguished Professor in the History of Medicine, as well as Professor of Medicine at the Washington University School of Medicine. He is the author. In 1972, he wrote a book on genetics and American society that dealt with, among other things, the question of eugenics. And most important to us and to the world and to me, he is one of the real experts on understanding all aspects of academic medicine and has published a trilogy of books called Learning to Heal, Time to Heal, and Let Me Heal that covers all aspects of academic medicine. And at the moment, he is involved in a project writing a book on the history and effects of racism in medicine. So I am pleased, and that's an understatement, to introduce to you Dr. Kenneth Ledmura to talk. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Don. It's a great pleasure and privilege for me to be here with you this afternoon. It's a special honor to be here on the anniversary of the GPPA program. Dr. Chambers shared the information about the program with me prior to this meeting, and I familiarized myself with it. And all I can say is that it's an extraordinary and impressive program. What is especially notable to me is not just the factual material presented, but the emphasis on rigor, critical thinking, problem solving, as well as an instilling the values and understanding of what medicine properly is. So I congratulate all of you in the GPPA program. It's also a special pleasure for me to speak at the University of Illinois. In my own journey in medical education, for many reasons, I've been long fond of the University of Illinois. And I also have a personal reason, because my father is a graduate of the University of Illinois College of Medicine, class of 1936, MD 1937. Many of you listening may not know what that means. There was a program before World War II. University of Illinois was one of, a dozen, 15 schools in the country that proceeded in this fashion that would grant the MD degree only after the successful completion of a one-year internship. So hence my father was typical, MD 36, class of 36, MD 1937. So for all these reasons, a great pleasure to be with you today. Well, and speaking of the social contract, it may be helpful to identify some of its characteristics and what it is. And most important, this is not an explicit legal document. Rather, it's an implicit understanding between medicine and society as to how they can best serve each other. Each side has a responsibility to the other. Medicine to improve health and improve quality of lives, and to expand knowledge through research so we can do a better job of that in the future. Society to provide our medical schools and teaching hospitals and research institutions the substantial material resources they need to conduct their good work. And in saying that, you'll notice that emphasis of the social contract is on academic medicine. Society provides money generously to the University of Illinois for education, research, building, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't subsidize the practices of individual physicians in the same way. So there's an academic focus to the contract. And I should also point out that the social contract is a related concept to professionalism, but they're not identical. The social contract speaks of medicine, academic medicine, as a collective institutional whole, which is different from professionalism, the term we typically use to the values and attributes and behaviors and beliefs of individual physicians as they carry out their work. And the social contract is a much more recent phenomenon with its origins post Civil War America, in contrast to professionalism and altruism and serving patients, which goes back to Hippocrates and before, because again, this is in reference to the actions of individual doctors with individual patients. Now, we can't really understand how powerful the social contract is without some sense of where we came from. If one examines American medical education after the Civil War, it was in a chaotic condition. All medical education at that time was done at proprietary medical schools, which were very small entities. If they had a building of their own, they were amply endowed. Many operated on the second floor above a corner drugstore or bank. The faculties were small, numbering 6, 8, 10. They were private practitioners who in their spare time worked at the medical school. Their income came from tuition, and they split the fees among themselves, and the mark of a good medical school was how profitable it was. Entrance requirements were not required to get into an American medical school. There were no examinations other than an end examination. What little science was taught, instruction was lecture alone. There was no practical work at all. What little science was taught was through lectures and textbook reading. And similarly, in the clinical subjects, it was all by lecture. There was no meaningful contact with patients. Research was not part of the medical school at that time. So this was the setting for the creation of modern medicine, which came through academic medicine. This process begins in the late 1860s, 1870s. It matures with the Johns Hopkins, which became the paragon of what medical education should be. The Johns Hopkins Hospital opened in 1889, the medical school 1893, and the process generalized. So after Johns Hopkins, so the Hopkins model became the norm for all medical schools in this country, a process that was complete by 1920. And it was successful. Society got what it needed. Medicine was working. For the first time in human history, how a doctor was trained really mattered and made a difference. And medicine, particularly our academic medical centers, benefited because society provided the resources necessary to conduct good work. If you're going to have full-time faculty, research, laboratories, complete libraries, real contact with patients, et cetera, you can't do that on meager tuition alone. You need additional support, and society provided that support. From the late 19th century through World War II, the support was primarily from private philanthropy and from the states supporting their state medical school. The most notable institution of philanthropy at that time was the General Education Board, which was John D. Rockefeller's major foundation for the support of education and medicine at that time. And the states became real contributors to their own individual medical schools, including the University of Illinois. The support became even greater and more profound after World War II. We have the expansion of NIH, and the funds from NIH have been vital to research, vital to medical schools, because you'll remember that NIH grants provide not only support for an investigator, but very substantial indirect support that goes to the expenses and capital plans of the medical school. In 1965, we have the advent of Medicare, which was very important to medical education, particularly residency training, because the major funder then and now of resident salaries and residency programs comes through Medicare. But I would point out that in an era of government support, private philanthropy remains important. It's not the dominant force that it was before the government got into the picture. On the other hand, it remains highly significant. Think of today of the Howard Hughes Trust, or the Wellcome Trust, or the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, or the impact of unusually wealthy individuals who are focused on medicine. Earlier this year, Michael Bloomberg, in one stroke, created 150 endowed professorships at Johns Hopkins. And we have a number of medical schools that have been so grateful to their big donors who have contributed 9-figure amounts that they renamed the schools after them. So private support remains important. How does the social contract work? Well, there have been many successes. Clearly, medicine has delivered. And I hear a bit of perspective and historical understanding can make it even a more powerful point. Most of us, myself among them, have the bias that medicine began our first day of medical school. But of course, that is not true. And as one goes through his or her journey in medicine, you see how much it grows and changes. So by the time you're a mid-career physician, you've had to relearn medicine often, and you see extraordinary changes and developments from the time you began medical school. Take senior physicians, and you can multiply that factor. If you take a broader historical picture, for example, the medicine of 1921 versus 2021 is more profound still. And one cannot help but be extraordinarily impressed and in deep admiration of what medicine has delivered. What are the most important discoveries? This is a personal list. On the standpoint of scientific knowledge, I'd point to the medicine salt experiment that pointed to DNA as the inheritance factor, and to the work of Watson and Crick delineating the structure of DNA, which allowed so much since then. From a diagnostic perspective, I would offer non-invasive imaging, which took off in the early 1970s, first with echocardiography and CT scanning, and expanded thereafter, MRIs, PET scanning, and so forth. From the standpoint of therapeutics, I'd offer antibiotics as the single most important development. Society has responded. It has provided material and financial support beyond anything that Osler and Flexner and Welch and the others might have imagined. Just look about us. We should just look about us at the scientific palaces in which we work today, as well as the extraordinary size of our faculties. When Abraham Flexner advocated that all schools should have full-time faculty members to earn accreditation, he defined that as 6 full-time faculty members for the entire school. Now 6 full-time faculty members would barely make a unit within a division, within a department of the school. Extraordinary expansion. And we've been the beneficiaries of society's respect, as well as society granting us the autonomy to conduct our internal affairs. But there have been deficiencies and weaknesses in execution of the social contrast. Some of them have come from us in medicine. We've paid no attention to costs, and I know everyone in the audience understands how profound a problem cost is. We've had a traditional emphasis on treatment rather than prevention or public health. Many have long raised the questions whether we're producing the types of doctors that society needs, or we're getting people who truly have the values and behaviors and characteristics that we want. the kindness and empathy and ability to express that? Are we producing doctors of the right specialty distribution? The common currency today is too many specialists, too few primary care physicians. That's not a new criticism, but it continues. Are we producing too many physicians who practice in urban areas and not enough for rural areas? And another problem for us in medicine is our focus on individuals, not on the system. We've done an extraordinary job with our individual patients, but there's great waste and inefficiency in the system. The question of how caring the system is can be raised. So consider, for example, an individual patient, how easy it is to locate a doctor, to get to the doctor. If the patient makes it to the doctor's office, how long is the wait to see the doctor in the office? How is that person treated once they're there? Is that person treated with respect and dignity and kindness and caring and given good support? So we've been criticized, and I believe appropriately, on these levels. And a final breakdown in the social contract, in my view, has been in terms of our values and our directions. Have we become too greedy? Are we self-serving? Are we really as altruistic as we like to say we are? And this can be questioned. There's no doubt in my mind that physicians need to be paid exceedingly well. But what we don't like to ask is then of how much is enough. Physicians in the last several decades have been more focused on their own income and circumstances than the whole. So the ophthalmologist will be concerned on Medicare reimbursement for cataract extractions and nothing else. And if they feel that reimbursement is too low, they'll adjust by lowering the threshold for how much of a cataract you need to justify surgery. A nephrologist will focus on reimbursement for dialysis, nothing else. AAMC will focus on NIH and research budgets, but at least until recently, has been less focused on some of these larger issues that we've been talking about today. What about size? Have we grown too big? Academic medical centers need to be large, and we need to be actively engaged with the patient. We need patients so our students, residents, and fellows can learn. Faculty need to be engaged with patient care so that they can maintain their clinical sharpness, need to be engaged with care so that they remain the most sophisticated and capable doctors in the country and available to other doctors for referral on difficult and thorny cases. We need to be active in practice. However, academic medicine was designed to support and maintain the medical system in the way that I've just described. It was not designed to be the medical system. And that's, many of us feel that we've become too large because so much of the work we do is what Flexner and Osler would have called the quote unquote ordinary practice of medicine. Competing with the private physicians in the area, seeing patients for the sake of seeing patients without any genuine interest or activity in research. Full-time private practitioners operating within the aegis of a faculty practice plan. How big should we be? What is that optimal size? And how do we measure ourselves? Once upon a time, we measured ourselves by the quality of the work. I remember a striking anecdote I discovered in my research at Mount Sinai Medical School and Hospital in 1980. The school ran a big deficit, and trustees prided themselves because of the quality of the work the school and the hospital were doing. They compared themselves with many non-academic private hospitals in New York, which were hugely profitable financially, but doing nothing other than taking care of patients. Well, that's changed because we now tend to measure ourselves on the basis of income. Productivity means dollars generated, relative value units taken care of, and so forth. Is this what we really mean to be? And there have been ways that society has not met its burdens. Financial support, though generous, is irregular, subject to whim, particularly in research and education. Municipal hospitals, long important part of academic medicine, have been particularly underfunded and have contracted greatly in the last 50 years. There have been huge regulatory burdens and administrative costs imposed on us. And society has imposed on us an economic definition of medicine, not a professional one. The emphasis has become the quantity, not quality of care. How many patients do you see? How quickly do you see them? Reduce that length of stay by 1 hour. This devaluation of time is quite harmful because you can't provide good care, you can't learn, and you can't think about the future without sufficient time to engage in activities. To my view, this is one of the truly existential threats that we face in medicine today. As we march forward, who leads, medicine or society? Certainly in terms of internal affairs, undergraduate medical education, standards of residency and fellowship training, medicine has been doing that and continues to do that and should do that. Standards of care, likewise, have been defined by medicine as appropriately they should be. But everything else in our healthcare system has really been determined by the social forces and political forces around us, every aspect of the organization, financing, and delivery of healthcare. Medicine has had the same issues with gender, religious discrimination, ethnic discrimination as the rest of society. We're doing better now, but not because we took the lead, but because society changed and we adopted with it. We can say the same today regarding racial equity, which since the George Floyd murder has changed our society. So we've become more conscious of that. But I point out to you regarding racial equity, just as an example, every step forward in racial equity in medicine, whether it be an elimination of quotas and what were then called Negroes, whether it be desegregation of hospitals, whether it be the end of the ward service, whether it be affirmative action. These were all events that were imposed on us by external forces. We complied with those forces. The leadership and the power came from society externally and not from us. These are extraordinarily complex issues. Geographic and specialty distribution. It would be easy to say, well, medicals need to produce more generalists and fewer specialists, or produce more doctors for rural areas. But that, in fact, is very hard to do because many factors influence the decision of a physician regarding what specialty and where to practice. Forces beyond the immediate control of the medical center. Some areas are perceived as more intellectually exciting than others. Radiology was considered a very dull, boring field and one of the easiest specialties to obtain a residency until the early 1970s, and non-invasive imaging changed that. At the core, in my view, is the fact that the United States is a society that emphasizes individualism, and individuals get to choose. And this puts us in contrast with many of our colleagues in other Western countries, such as England, which are much more collective. There in England, for example, a medical graduate does not get to choose geography or specialty. They're told by the health service where there are openings and opportunities. You take it or you leave it. So this ethic of individualism, I think, is a core issue there. Preventive care. I'll skip the next two just for the sake of time. But preventive care, we've talked about everything we can and should do, and to place more emphasis on prevention. But how far can we go? Is it a secret that tobacco smoking is risky, that drug abuse is harmful, that alcohol use is harmful, and so forth? It's easy to omit the role that individual responsibility plays in this. And then the further you go into the social determinants of health, the more non-medical forces start to appear. Teenage pregnancy, drive-by shootings, rising murder rates. The great sociologist Renee Fogg once warned us to beware beware medicalizing social problems. This teenage problem, something for our medical scientists and medical schools to solve, or is it a social issue that has medical ramifications? And certainly there is more that we can do and should do to address these problems. On the other hand, the further you get away from a direct interaction with the doctor and the patient, the more thorny and refractory and difficult to affect many of these issues are. What are some of the opportunities to make things better? And I think that historical perspective really helps, because you realize, despite our problems, how good we really have it and how much better things are today, and that things can be better will be better in the future. And in making assessment, it's important to understand this is something that the GPPA program conveys to its students and participants, to truly understand what is transient and what is constant in medicine. Virtually everything changes, but there's certain core intellectual principles and core values that need to be identified and maintained and defended and applied, even as everything else about them changes. And what are its core values and principles? Not to accept competence, but to strive for perfection. Since none of us can reach perfection, I'll accept what Don Chambers and GPPA are doing. Excellence will do. But striving to be the best. Working continually to produce better doctors for our children and grandchildren. That's education, and to expand our capacity through research, to cultivate problem-solving skills, the ability to manage uncertainty, to encourage curiosity. We have to remember that when a patient comes to see one of us, that patient doesn't come with a diagnosis. That patient comes with a problem that needs to be figured out, that require critical thinking and problem-solving skills. Another core value is that of altruism and dedication and hard work. Those particularly apply to individuals. A related core principle is that of service. And certainly as individuals, we have opportunities to serve in a broad sense. This applies even more to our institution of medicine. We need to remembering that medicine is to serve, and that medicine is a public trust, and that medicine properly is conducted as university level professional education, not vocational training. And another great concern of mine in my work has been about the forces that would have us devolve from university education into vocational training. And this reinforces our responsibility to preserve high university level standards. And so what are some of the solutions? And from where I sit, they largely come from within, what we can do within medicine, not by inventing something new, but by defending and expanding our core principles. Defending core principles, as an example, critical thinking, scientific reasoning, problem solving, managing uncertainty. We talk a lot about this, but we often don't execute that well. A true problem solver and critical thinker will view a patient as a scientific hypothesis and come up with a diagnosis, and using scientific reasoning, develop a diagnostic or therapeutic plan, observe the results, modify going forward over time. We don't do that. Instead of asking what tests might be needed because of the patient's presentation, it is so easy for us, and it always has been the last 120 years, just to get everything there and see what the data shows. Well, that's not really good reasoning or practice. It creates risks of iatrogenesis, and it's clear how extraordinarily expensive this non-thinking approach is. And here's an opportunity for us to make a huge impact on waste and excess expenditures in medicine just by doing a better job of practicing. We can expand the core principles, and here admissions is a good example. It has always been in medicine's best interest to seek the finest people to enter medicine as medical students. We want the best. And by expanding our view of what that pool should be, we can expand entry to medicine. We've already done it with gender. We've already done it in terms of making medicine open to Jews and Catholics. We are starting to do a better job of that within race, but being democratic and having a greater sense of opportunity for all is very consistent with our core principles of seeking the best doctors. And then, of course, remembering that medicine is a public trust and that we exist to serve. And it is my belief that by doing a better job of defending and expanding our core principles, we within medicine can take major steps toward invigorating and defending and preserving a good social contract. And lastly, and others today have mentioned it, but that sense of optimism. Medicine is always messy. It's always complex. There's never been a time that it's been without problems, and that's always going to be the case. But we've made huge strides despite everything. And in my view, there's never been a better time to enter medicine today, given all the potential for the future. It's so exciting, and the opportunities are vast. And I would say, particularly to the students and residents and fellows and trainees who might be in attendance, I'm envious of you. You have your whole career in medicine ahead of you, and I'm approaching the end of mine. I'd love to trade places with you. So there's a lot to be proud of, to be encouraged by, and take share in that. It's been a privilege to speak. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ken. Lots to think about, lots to talk about, lots to discuss and question about, but we'll have to defer that hopefully to our panel and even after that. Batting cleanup today in the end of our baseball season is Dr. Jordan Cohn. As I read his CV, it reminded me of a comment that John Kennedy made when he was given a Yale honorary degree, that he now had the best of both worlds, a Harvard education and a Yale degree. In fact, Dr. Cohn doesn't require that, since he has a Yale undergraduate degree and a Harvard medical degree. He has been, he was the past president of the Association of American Medical Colleges, the chairman emeritus of the Arnold P. Gold Foundation for Humanism in Medicine. He has held every kind of position in academic medicine, from chairman of the Department of Medicine and professor of the University of at the University of Chicago's Pritzker School of Medicine, and head of medicine at Michael Reese Hospital, to dean of a medical school, to a member of the National Institute of Medicine, and on and on and on. And he is going to, as our cleanup hitter, he is going to speak to an interesting topic, particularly following on Dr. Ledmer, which is, has medicine lost its mojo? Dr. Cohn.
Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this symposium, and congratulations on the 25th anniversary of a truly excellent and outstanding program. I'm really so happy to be part of this. I'm especially happy to be part of this session since you began by recognizing your colleague Les Sandlow. Les, as you may know, was a close colleague of mine at Michael Reese Hospital in the mid '80s before he came to the University of Chicago, and his death was a great loss to medicine. He's made a number of contributions, and to me personally was a very close friend. So thank you for recognizing him and giving me a chance to participate in that remembrance. Well, what I want to talk about today has a lot of resonance with what Ken Ledmer just told us all about. Dr. Ledmer pointed out the elements of the social contract and noted that it's not a true contract in the sense that it's not written. It's an understanding that is developed over the years, over the centuries, really, in the relationship between medicine and society. I like to view it as a two-way transaction, that it, first of all, is a commitment by the profession, an understanding by the profession and the practitioners to place the needs of the public and individual patients above self-interest. This, to me, is the core of the challenge that all doctors and the medical profession in general has in the face of modern society, to keep the focus on the individual patient and on society rather than self-interest. If we can do that according to the social contract, then in return, the society guarantees that the profession has a high degree of autonomy to determine its standards of practice, to set criteria for entrance to the profession, establish norms for conducting medical research, and as Ken pointed out, provide much of the resources that are necessary to carry out these various functions. So this social contract, such as it is, seems to me has been challenged throughout centuries by various pressures that impinge upon medicine. And I want to tease out a couple of the contemporary challenges that I think are making the social contract, particularly this aspect of subserving self-interest to the interest of others, particularly challenging. Two challenges I want to tease out. One is the widespread superimposition of commercialism. Medicine has become so heavily involved in the commercial transactions that it is virtually impossible to engage any aspect of medicine without thinking about its financial impacts and some of the ways in which finances have distorted, the financial considerations have distorted the various functions of medicine. The consequences of this to the extent that medicine has become a predominant consideration, it leads to a mounting number of conflicts of interest, which are obviously at variance with the fundamental notions of the social contract. It's also clear that the torrent of powerful technologies, which have been incredibly helpful in terms of advancing our ability to care for people and to banish diseases and to prevent diseases from happening. The technologies are indispensable for modern medicine, but it has had a negative aspect to it in this regard, namely that it has led to an attenuation of the doctor-patient relationship. Here I've illustrated the way in which the electronic medical record has become such an important aspect of the relationship between doctor and medicine that it takes the doctor's eyesight away from the patient towards the screen rather than towards the maintaining of a human relationship that exists. So the attenuation of the doctor-patient relationship is another challenge to the social contract. Well, this has resulted, I think, in unprecedented temptations on the part of both medicine and the profession in general. Some of the organizations that represent the profession are in many ways tempted to disregard the social contract in favor of self-interest. And that is a fundamental nail in the coffin, if you will, of the social contract. Well, this hasn't gone unrecognized. I think people have begun to have for some time been concerned about the way in which the social contract is being potentially shredded by some of these contemporary challenges. The one particular response that I'm closely familiar with is that of the American Board of Internal Medicine, which in 2002 produced the Physician Charter. The purpose of the charter was initiated by the ABIM and was endorsed by over 100 organizations. And its purpose was to maintain the fidelity of medicine's social contract by trying to reinforce physicians and the profession's affirmation of their active dedication to the norms of professionalism, the personal commitment to the welfare of their patients, and the collective efforts to improve the healthcare systems for the welfare of society, fundamental aspects of the elements of the social contract. Well, the contract enunciated three overarching principles that the profession and physicians needed to adhere to, namely the primacy of patient welfare, patient's autonomy, and the notion of social justice, which is again inherent in the notion of benefiting society at large. The compact went up to enunciate 10 professional commitments for the medical profession. Let me see if I can get rid of this thing. Maintain professional competence, deal honestly with patients, respect patients' confidentiality, avoid inappropriate relations with patients, avow scientific knowledge, fulfill professional responsibilities, improve the quality of healthcare, advocate improvement and equitable access to care, support the distribution of scarce resources, and maintain trust by managing conflicts of interest. I don't think anybody, I hope no one in the audience or anywhere else in the profession would take issue with any of these aspects of professionalism. They are all, but I think it's worth noting that in every case, they are modes of conduct. They are behaviors that individual physicians are commended to adhere to as behaviors, as modes of conduct. The problem with that is that limitations of the charter relate to the fact that professionalism is a way of acting. It's a way of conforming to external standards. The question is, can those standards of behavior alone be relied upon to protect the public and the patients in the face of contemporary temptations that I've outlined? Well, the question is, can we reliably sustain medicine's social contact that way, or do we need something more resilient than a promise to comply with a set of rules? Professionalism, again, in my judgment, is a set of rules. Do we need more than the rules in order to allow for the social contract to flourish? Well, here's where humanism, in my view, enters. And Don has already mentioned Francis Weld Peabody. The notion of humanism in medicine dates all the way back to Hippocrates, I think, as Ken pointed out. Now, this is not a new concept in medicine. Medicine has always been viewed appropriately as both a science and as an art, and that art being the art of human relations, the art of respect, of trust, of gaining the confidence of other human beings. And Francis Weld Peabody, as you already have heard, wrote almost 100 years ago that the secret to the care of the patient is in caring for the patient. That's the aspect of humanism that I think is critically important if we're going to sustain our commitment to the social contract. Well, professionalism then is a way of acting, whereas humanism, in my view, is a way of being. That is to say, humanism is a set of deep-seated personal convictions about one's obligations to others, especially to others in need. It manifests itself by personal attributes that can't be reduced to behaviors or measured in metrics. They are altruism, duty, integrity, respect for others, compassion, and of course, caring. So humanistic physicians, in my view, are intuitively, strongly motivated to adhere to the traditional expectations that are called for in medicine's social contract. It's not enough simply to go through the motions of adhering to these 10 elements of behaviors that constitute professionalism, but they need to be underwritten and supported, enforced by a true sense of what the obligation of the individual is. So humanism, in my view, is a passion that animates authentic professionalism. Physicians whose professionalism lacks a solid foundation in humanism are in constant danger, it seems to me, of succumbing to the ever-present temptations and deviating from the ethical commitments of medicine, from violating the elements of the social contract. So humanism then is medicine's mojo. That's what fires the individual physician and in turn the organizations representing physicians in the profession, fires them to adhere to the basic tenets of the social contract. So we return to the question that I raised at the outset. Has medicine lost its mojo? Well, I think the answer is clearly no. And the evidence for that, in no small part, has come from our recent experience with this pandemic. The response of medical professionals to this unprecedented challenge of the current pandemic, I think, has been truly remarkable. The selfless outpouring of life-saving, heroic actions was and continues to be truly stunning in the way it has been perceived both internally and by the society at large. What we are witnessing, it seems to me, is the passion of humanism activating the professionalism that's called for by medicine's social contract. Now, to be sure, the pandemic has produced a great deal of burnout. We read a lot about the fact that physicians and nurses in particular are finding themselves overwhelmed with the responsibilities that they've taken on in dealing with the pandemic, and that the resources that have been available, certainly in some sectors of the country, have simply not been commensurate with the magnitude of the challenges that our healthcare professionals are leading. But it seems to me that that's not evidence of a lack of humanism, of a lack of medicine's mojo. It's simply a reflection of the fact that medicine has been called upon to exert extraordinary effort in order to combat this unprecedented foe. So medicine, I think, is still the mojo of medicine is still very much in evidence, albeit stressed to the limits by this pandemic. So the question that I want to leave us with is what the challenge the medical educators are, recognizing that future physician practitioners must be endowed with the requisite humanistic instincts if we're going to maintain the precepts of professionalism and our end of the social contract. So how can medicine fortify humanism? How can educators rather fortify humanism in medicine? Well, first of all, we have to recognize that the people we attract into medicine have a great deal to do with the kind of physicians we ultimately produce. So it seems to me that part of our responsibility, part of our challenge, is to explicitly identify those admissions criteria that can help identify truly empathetic applicants. This is not an easy task, and there's no surefire way to identify individuals who are going to end up being humanistic in the final analysis. But I think there are some very important insights that have been gained over the years by admissions officers who have attended to this issue. And now we are dealing with holistic admissions criteria, which are looking at things far greater than what was the case when I went to medical school, where grade point averages and MCAT scores were the beginning and the end of the admissions criteria. Now we recognize that there are many, many more aspects of an individual's background that needs to be in evidence in order to qualify for admission to a school like the University of Illinois. So applying those admissions criteria explicitly to identify empathetic applicants, first of all, is in keeping with our need to also expand the range of backgrounds, ethnic, geographic, and religious backgrounds that need to be representative of the country that we are trying to serve. So that's number one. Number two, as sociologists have clearly demonstrated over the years, if you want to change a culture, if you want to pass on a cultural norm from one generation to the next, there are certain explicit things that one can do to ensure that transition occurs. Namely, a big part of that is to identify appropriate role models for young people to emulate as they go through their maturation process, and engaging and rewarding appropriate role models who are emblematic of humanistic aspects of medical care is absolutely essential if we're going to reproduce this quality in the next generation of physicians. Mounting ceremonies that celebrate humanism, that bring to public awareness the aspects of humanism that we as a community deem to be important and deserve recognition and celebration. Bestowing awards that recognize exemplars of humanism is an important aspect of cultural transition. And incorporating relevant humanities in the curriculum, narratives taken from literature that can illustrate the kinds of emotional interactions that represent the best of human interactions, and even visual representations, paintings that can demonstrate the act of humanism, the act of empathy in the course of human interactions. All of these things, I think, together can help us ensure that our students become empathetic and humanistic physicians. And let me just end with a shout out for the Gold Foundation. As Don mentioned, I've been active in the Gold Foundation for Humanism in Medicine, tagline of which is to keeping healthcare human. So I'm sure that the University of Illinois is well aware of the programs that the Gold Foundation offers, but I would just encourage you to consider the kinds of help that can be garnered from the Gold Foundation as you try to mount your programs to fortify your students with the humanistic qualities that will serve them in the future. So thank you for your attention. If there's time, I'm obviously happy to answer some questions.
Thanks, Jordan, and thanks to all of the members of the panel. We are somewhat limited with time. I would like to pose two thoughts to the panel, and in answering these thoughts, also feel free to reflect on what anyone else has said. The social contract, as we understand it historically from Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, etc., for the US has its origin in the Declaration of Independence that all are created equal with certain inalienable rights. Amongst these are health, liberty, happiness, and so forth. Added to that is the Gettysburg Address, in which Lincoln spoke to the democratic principles of government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We know now that all people are not created equal. We are about to deal with issues, for example, of genetic inequality and other kinds of inequality. Is the social contract for medicine different than the social contract for society? And do we need to pay attention to those differences? And I speak to that because the social contract dictates that medicine is a common good or a public good. On the other hand, we are dealing increasingly, as all of the speakers have alluded to the concept as medicine and health as a business. Those two views are really in contradiction of one another, but they have to live with one another in our society. How do we deal with this kind of problem? Should we even talk about it? And should we expand on it in both our education and professional activities? So I leave this to the panel to think about and respond to.
Let me take a whack at it, Don. I think, first of all, you're correct, obviously, that we have a society that is very different across the spectrum of geography, of ethnic background, of origins. I don't accept the fact that that is a difference that should be determined in terms of how we deal with our responsibilities as physicians. I think the fundamental commitment we have is to treat everyone as an individual, not that they are the same one individual to the next, but their individuality needs to be recognized and dealt with accordingly, so that I don't see a conflict between what medicine is obligated to do and the fact that we're dealing with a wide variety of individuals who bring to us different backgrounds, different genetic makeups, different experiences, obviously different environmental experiences, that all of which determine to a great degree what kind of illness and what kind of disorders they are suffering from. So I don't see the conflict that you're suggesting.
Anybody else want to respond to this?
I don't see a conflict either. I think you're quite right, John, that people are different from each other, their genetic differences. The key idea in the American ethos is equality of opportunity. And if we can do that, then that's very consistent with medicine's social contract. The dilemma we have faced as a country is that we have not traditionally lived true to our ideals, but the closer we do live true to our ideals, that also reinforces, in my view, the social contract. So I don't see any conflict.
So interestingly, a member of our audience raised the question, he's a physician, of how can he practice excellence if he is forced to see patients in limited time periods and as many as 50 patients a day? That can reflect on both medicine as a business and, in a sense, the erosion of excellence. Is that a valid point?
Without question, that's a valid point. I think the fact that the commercial aspects of medicine have, in some respects, and the one that he identifies as a common one, where the time that is made available for a physician to deal with a patient is simply inadequate to do the kind of job that we need to do and that we are obligated to do if we're going to fulfill our obligations. I don't think this is something the profession can deal with by itself. It needs the cooperation of society. It needs our public policy wonks to recognize that what they are doing to medicine is antithetical to the social contract, antithetical to our ability to deliver the kind of healthcare that the public expects and deserves.
I would
Jordan,
agree with that, Don.
go ahead.
You'll recall that the title of one of my books was Time to Heal, because we don't have the time to heal that we did once upon a time. In my view, the ultimate problem and the ultimate solution is financial, how we reimburse medical and pay for medical care. And the ultimate solution is working with the politicians and others to modify our principles of payment in such a way that they will reward time spent with patients and the quality of care, and not simply the number of patients seen.
Okay, I'd like to make a comment, maybe a slightly different lens to which to look at this. We work in a hospital here in the UIC that is completely just overrun with patients in need. And the reason that our doctors often need to see many patients per hour is the fact that there are just so many patients. I mean, America is sicker, patients are living a longer time, and overall, the supply of physicians hasn't gone up demonstrably, I think. So part of the issue is just delivery of care to the many needy people at the level that are required. So I don't know that it's always a commercial influence. Now, one might argue if physicians are reimbursed better or there were incentives, there'd be more physicians to help deliver the care. I might say that there might be other ways we solve the problem. The idea that physicians aren't the only people within the health system that deliver care, that interprofessional work is going to be required to deliver care to the vast number of patients who will need it. I think that while technology, as you showed very elegantly, causes physicians to turn their back and sit at a computer and type, also, if we use technology to improve the interfaces, could actually be liberating. Is there a way to design user interfaces, technology that actually liberates the physicians from having to ever look at a computer or even touch a pen or paper? Are there ways to use other folks in the system to provide some of those functions, to allow physicians to do what they really need to do, which is to face patients, interact with them, do exams, et cetera. So I can't deny that there are problems with the way that commercialization and other entities, commercial entities have affected medicine. But I think the number of sick patients can't be underestimated, particularly if we want to provide access, real access and fair access to all who really need it. It's just a slightly different view.
Erica, you've been monitoring the audience. Are there any questions that you see out in the audience?
We just had a question come up in the box. Let me read through it. It says, considering that the already vast divide in health of and healthcare delivery to minority groups, wouldn't the use of AI under commonly U.S. system of pay for better quality care actively deny novel procedures to underprivileged groups, increasing the disparity already in place? How should we utilize AI in a positive way without widening the current racial divide?
I tried to touch on this a bit in my discussion, but I think there needs to be intentionality about guarding against just what you suggest, that you wed AI only to the highest technologies. I mean, one element is there are many applications of AI, quite frankly, to low technology, whether it's just some simple things to apply AI technology to the review of systems, to a good history, to a careful exam, et cetera, social history. I mean, those can be powerful tools. I think the idea about high technology being available only to certain parts of our country is sort of independent of whether AI is used, frankly. And I think there are some economic factors or indicators which could create more equality. The way insurers pay, the way we reimburse physicians in this country may undergo a transition. It's probably beyond the scope exactly of this talk, although it's touched upon in some ways, whether it's a single payer system, et cetera, et cetera. Those are things that might affect that more than I think the use of AI. Just an opinion.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to add, we soon have to close, but I'd like to add or ask one other question. It seems to me that just today with this symposium, we've dealt with a plethora of very complex issues. One of the things that I think we've done over time is try to simplify complexity. And some complexity really can't be simplified to be effectively understood. In this sense, I think I'm not convinced that society, be it the society out there of underrepresented minorities, underprivileged people, or the society of the wealthy, that either of those groups really necessarily have the public understanding of medicine and science and treatment that they should have, so that they could understand, so that they can properly understand. Is that a fair assessment? And if so, what are the things we can do as not only medical educators, but educators of the public and of society to alter that so that people can understand and some of the tensions and anger out there can be diffused?
Well, Don, I think it's self-evident that there's a paucity of understanding of science and of respect for the scientific process and for scientists and for the products of scientific endeavor. I mean, the vaccine hesitancy being the current vivid example, but there are many others where science is simply not well understood, or if it is understood, it is willfully ignored. So these are huge societal issues, it seems to me, that do place limits or certainly obstacles in the way of our doing our job as well as we might otherwise do it.
I think part of it is understanding, and I think maybe even a bigger part is trust. I mean, I don't understand how the microchip in my computer works, really. I mean, I have a basic, but I don't really understand how it works, yet I trust engineers to create computers and I use them. I think the most disappointing thing about perhaps the current crisis around vaccination is really the lack of trust that society now has in science and medicine. And I think to think about the things we can do, and maybe we've done some things to lose the trust, and relating back to some of the commercial, the way commercialization has entered medicine, there are things that we need to do as a profession to regain the trust. So even if the understanding isn't perfect, that there is trust around what we're doing, and it has to be earned, not just merely expected.
Point well taken.
Ken, do you have any comments?
I'll just ditto what has already been said.
Okay, thank you. And thank everyone. This has been a wonderful.
There's another
One
one
more
last
question.
question, and I don't know if you want to answer, but it says, I think the question of mojo in medicine might also be phrased as a question of professionalism in medicine and its evolution. I wonder what our esteemed speakers think of the arc of professionalism and its future.
Wow.
Better have a future or we're all sunk.
Yes, I mean, I think we better have a future, or optimism or becomes rampant pessimism. But what that future is and the dimensions of that future really represent a set of conclusions that we can only discuss at our homecoming when all of our symposia have finished. So thanks all of you. Thanks especially to two unsung hero or heroines, namely Erica Peterson and Elizabeth Rodriguez, who really worked now both behind the scenes, and now you can see in front of the scenes to ensure the success of this symposium. And I invite all of you and more to come to our next symposium on November 18th, when we will be discussing the challenges of diversity and excellence and optimism as part of that. So thank you all, and enjoy the rest of the evening.